What's going on, everyone? And welcome back to this episode of Split Screen D&D, the place where we're attacking all things Dungeons & Dragons from both sides of the screen. My name's Tom Quinn, Resident Dungeon Master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth. And you know, Tom, I think today's subject is going to be an interesting one. I see it debated every once in a while. Because we have martial classes and we have magical classes. And everyone's like, oh, magical just dominates martial. And while I agree that magic does reach such a power potential, I think we're just it's not taking in the full picture of D&D, and you're writing off martial too fast there.
Okay, I will be very excited for you to paint the entire picture for me, because I think you're talking to one of the people in that camp right now, but I'm always open to having my mind changed. So I'd love for that to be the case. Before you set to changing my mind, though, for all you beautiful people at home, could do us a huge solid by hitting that like, hitting that comment, hitting that subscribe, bust that little bell. If you want to help us create a lot more content here at Modern Myth, you can do so directly by jumping on over to patreon.com/modmyth. We're going to try to keep it super sweet and super quick.
Yes.
Let's get after it. Martial caster divide.
Yeah, there's and it's not like I'm making the brazen claim that martial in any way beats magic, and especially when you get to high level D&D magic, you can warp reality to whatever you want. You can't really compete with that. But it's not like the wizard is just standing there alone on top of the hill and all the other characters are just bowing before its feet.
No, I think I definitely agree with the notion. I mean, I think across tables we're not seeing an absolute dominance in character selection or creation by way of caster, but I don't think it's also, I think, no secret that magic has become more and more pervasive as additions have gone on. And I think there's a reason for that. Partially, I think it's system related. I think 5e wants to tell high fantasy stories. Yes. It's kind of designed to do that. But and I'm going to kind of just pitch it back to you, because I want to hear, I want to let you dig your heels in here a little bit before. Okay. But I do think that to some extent, magic's increased prevalence, the case that I guess I will be trying to make is that to some extent, that's because players aren't stupid, and when they look at their options, it's very difficult to look at the array of characters that they could create and go, you know what, given everything, I think I'm going to go full martial. And so, but like I said, that hasn't outlined any of the finite stuff yet. But
right.
But yeah, hit me with your initial thoughts. So, or is it easier the other way around? I don't know.
No. I can hit you some initial thoughts, and I don't know if you want to talk. We always kind of go about the pillars and addressing how each magic march. I think that might be an interesting way to go with it.
I think the tiers are another, like, that's kind of a two-faceted way of thinking about it. Yeah. But certainly, you know, it should not be overlooked that just because a character is a monster in combat or a monster in one pillar,
right?
You know, if the game is balanced such that they really rely on their team in the other places, I don't consider that to be overpowered, or you know, I don't think that lends to the issue. But I think that's kind of two lenses that would be helpful in looking at this.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe we'll approach it from both those perspectives, because I think one of the biggest places everyone goes, and rightfully so, is combat. Again, 5e is
in 5e, yeah, it's
a big part of it. And so magic. So I'll say what I like about magic, and then I'll say, like, hey, this is why martial can't be left out of this conversation.
Okay.
Maybe high tier when we're getting to like level 18, 19, 20. This is a little bit harder conversation to have. But I think even up to like level 11, 12, 13, 14.
Okay.
You could probably still say, because any spellcaster, they have their limited resources, right? So you have your spell slots. And while you can do amazing reality-bending things with these spell slots, it doesn't change the fact that you only have so many. And if your DM is any sort of DM, they know that, and they're going to be pushing you, because that's kind of where you tighten the noose on the magic users.
Right.
Is longer time between rests. So yeah, you could change the battlefield, but if you use all your fireballs in one encounter, Congratulations, you racked up some massive damage. Good for you. But now you are just casting Firebolt in the back lines and not doing anything compared to what you used to be able to do.
Right.
And that's where the Marshal has the exact opposite. Is they're kind of like always ready to go. Okay, Battle Master. There's definitely some resources that can be expended, but for the most part, you are doing consistent damage every single time. You're reliable. You're able to take hits. You're able to exchange with the enemies, which is something a lot of spellcasters really struggle with. And when they get engaged, it's like, oh crap! Now I can no longer be the badass wizard. I have to change my strategy. So they're able to just adapt to so many things so quickly. And yeah, your wizard might wall of force a lot of the forces, but without those martial characters, who's going to mop up those people that you left? You need those martial characters to back up that wizard or spellcaster. Okay, I went off for way too long.
No. I don't. So a couple of things there, and I think it will start to outline a little bit of I think you hit on something important. I think spell slots are obviously a finite resource.
Yes.
I think more tools have been injected into the game to recover that resource.
Okay.
Some of which are Unearthed Arcana and other things, but like I love the notion of the arcane being massive expenditures of power, but on a limited basis. You're going to have your a few big goes and that's it. Because what I love about that is, as that caster, you need to always be thinking, is this the moment?
That's
is
exactly
this one?
Yeah.
And to me, that's what a good magic system, if the magic system is trying to strive for that, really should be shooting for is put the caster's feet to the fire. Is this the fight worthy of that 5th level spell?
Right.
Or what's in the next room? Is it, is this just the prelude? That should always be the question. And I think that really kind of helps latch on to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
The fighter just keeps on fighting. They represent the endurance and the, I love that. A second point that I think certainly plays into this conversation is spell components. Spell components are another resource, and much like many of the other bean counting that has derived from earlier editions, in a lot of 5th edition settings, at a lot of tables, spell components have fallen by the wayside in terms of the rigidity with which, in the same way that rations, how many torches do you have? How many rations are you carrying? These things are not mainstays of fun at the 5th edition table, the way that they were cornerstones to older editions.
Yeah.
And so something I'll say in favor of your argument, because it's not, the rules as written give you a sense of what components you're going to need. If you're not being rigid in the enforcement of those,
right,
that is a way in which they're trying to balance magical classes. And if you're letting that slide, obviously that's going to increase the perceived power of the arcane. So in that regard, those are just two kind of finite resources that magic users have to deal with that other classes don't. Well, but I think with regard to the spell slots, I think the perception is simply, I'll put it this way. This is why I think there's fundamentally an issue, is if we take a level 1 character, level 1, whatever, I would say fighter represents the quintessential
martial,
but we can pick any of the purely martial classes.
Fighter,
at level
champion.
1, we go, okay, what is the most you're going to extract out of a single turn, or if you want to even microcosm that further, a single action?
Mm-hmm.
And if you compare we can use wizards, since that's kind of what we've been talking about, but I think it applies to any of the marshals and any of the casters. If you compare what that looks like on a turn-by-turn basis, even the cantrip, and cantrip I'm going to say is a root of part of the problem. I like the idea.
I like cantrips.
I like the idea that you're not, old school, you're like, well, that's it for me on my spells, and even though I'm the wizard, I guess I'm going to shoot this crossbow here or sling or quarterstaff or whatever it was that you felt proficient in. To some extent, I like the notion that the character had, again, that's a greater expression of absolute power tempered by true weakness when you don't have that power at your disposal. But take the cantrip, which is because it's not an apples to apples comparison to say, okay, they cast XYZ because they don't have unlimited spell slots, whereas the fighter can just keep swinging and swinging.
Right.
But even at level 1, which is I think the most comparable level between a caster and because like level 20, I think we can both agree pretty clearly the wish spell versus anything a fighter has, anything a rogue has. I mean, there's just no comparison there. But even at level 1, the comparison's closer than I think it should be. I think at level 1, if you're going to wield astronomical power at 20, then the fighter clearly should be stronger than you at 1.
Right.
And I'm not saying that the fighter isn't stronger, but I think it's by a narrow enough margin. And to some extent, the question is, and again, this is not me advocating getting rid of cantrips, but I have to point the finger and go, okay, I'm slinging a firebolt.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any spell slots. Let's say I'm tapped out. So
1d10.
That's what I'm falling back to. I'm just slinging my firebolt. Stacking up damage-wise to any of the martial classes. And obviously there's something to be said for the rogue sneak attack, and there's some other things that can be activated. But
level 1.
And it's kind of an apples to apple. We're in a pretty close space here.
We're in a close, but I don't know, because at level 1, you're talking about like the difference of 4 hit points can be a pretty big difference when you're fighting a 10 hit point enemy.
No doubt. But that's also the weakest thing they could be doing at level 1. And whereas if let's say you didn't have that cantrip at your disposal, and like I said, this is not it's purely kind of a devil's advocate position because they would then be falling back on a strength or a dex skill.
Right.
Which would clearly feel worse than them using their spellcasting modifier anytime they want to sling damage. They're just as likely to hit with their firebolt as they are to hit with a high level spell. It's just the damage that's scaling and the effects that scale.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a little bit of an issue that what we're representing for the fighter at level 1 literally is their max package. They're going to swing that weapon. That's it. That's what they've got in terms of their kit.
Oh, I don't agree. Because of the abilities that you get as you level up. Yeah.
No, at level 1 though, I'm saying.
Oh, at level 1. Yeah.
Yeah, level 1 you're going to swing that sword.
Yeah, level 1 you're going to swing the sword, but the thing is like wizards still have spells at level 1.
Well,
and they have
like
sleep, and which could again radically change.
And so I'm saying I'm making the comparison between their cantrip, which is the weakest thing they can apply, and literally the only thing, or let's call it the strongest thing that a fighter is going to apply in combat. And they're not that different. And that's what the wizard going, I'm keeping the big boy in my pocket. Like if he's choosing at level 1 to pocket that, he should feel that attrition relative to the party that's putting everything they have into the fight right now, which is, and like I said, I think they only diverge from there. At level 1, if we're not drawing a pretty concise comparison.
But it's you're looking at battlefield control maybe, and for the big boy, and then just regular damage. But that's not a battle is not a white room scenario.
No doubt.
If you have a fighter and a wizard and you're facing off against 4 rats, I mean, let's just use the level 1 thing. Okay. If that fighter isn't able to tie up those rats, then the wizard's not able to even cast that. They're probably going to be down.
Well, it could, and like I said, this is certainly not to suggest that the strengths of each of those classes aren't valuable in conjunction with one another. And certainly the wizard of anyone needs that help more than other. But if we're saying I have a wizard and 4 rats and you're a fighter versus 4 rats, my sleep spell is looking pretty fucking strong.
I guess that's true.
And so it's just the deal where And I think even that point, the fact that battlefields are dynamic places, and more beyond the battlefield, the game is a dynamic thing. every spellcaster represents way more flexibility than every martial class.
Yeah, but again, they're limited by their resource. So while they could, it's one of those things you have to balance. And what happens if they say like, okay, I can't do this? Then their flex, because they're like want to hold off on their big boys, then their flexibility decreases dramatically.
Well, I agree. I think that's again some of the changes that have been made with spellcasting, and it's not even necessarily changes, but it's just kind of letting them off the hook a little bit. Things like ritual casting. I mean, that's a big way of circumventing exactly what you're talking about.
Well, but the ritual casting I feel is pretty well balanced because it's all about the exploration. The pillar that we feel has the least amount of support in 5e, and this is I feel like they're at least acknowledging like, hey, you can use, because otherwise no one's going to cast detect magic when it's like, well, it's either detect magic or sleep or detect magic or something else, you know?
Right. Well, I all that to say is if you spin up 5 random encounters, they can be combat, they can be, pick your poison.
Sure.
It's a trap, it's combat, it's a door that needs unlocking, it's, whatever.
Right.
On a level by level basis, I think the casting half of the equation, and we half casters fit in a weird spot in this, but I'm talking
The
just
perfect blend.
a comparison between full casters and
No, I agree.
and pure martial.
Yeah.
When casters begin getting access to things like knock, they've just solved the problem that a rogue should be solving.
But there's a downside to knock. It's a loud fucking noise. So if you're trying to sneak in and you cast knock, that's why it's called. When it unlocks, it makes like almost a thunderous sound. Well, now you've alerted everyone in the presence. So you solved the problem, but not as well as a rogue would have.
Well, no, not as well as a rogue would have. But
a barbarian could solve this problem the same way. You take an axe to the door.
Well, I think that depends. I mean, because knock is sure it's at the cost of, but that barbarian still needs to make some check to do it. There's no guarantee that barbarian's knocking the door down.
Okay.
Which is now, and this is also starting to bleed into a little place where I think so much of the cool stuff that exists in the spell list, and I love the spell list. This is something I hated about 4th edition. Was the missing spell list. I mean, it just drove me nuts. And to some extent, I actually think 4th edition solved a little bit of what we're talking about, but they solved it in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Instead of finding really cool things for martial classes to do, they just made everything feel like they basically removed casters altogether. Right. They just said, okay, well, you have this skinned ability, but all of those cool things, many of them are thoroughly constrained by the actual rule set. Many of them are creative spells, and there's not a lot of mechanical actuations in martial characters' kits that are clearly, how creative can I get? I'm pitching this to the DM. Sure, but a rogue might have some cool acrobatics they want to engage in, but that's not explicit to the rogue. They might be better at it than other people, but taking a spell and going, what's a good example of
creative?
Minor illusion.
I was going to say illusion spells are great.
Yeah, illusions are all great spells.
Yeah,
could be total waste, could be massively impactful.
Yeah,
but it's not near as constrained by the rigidity of the rule set in the way that martial characters' abilities almost exclusively are. And so part of that lends to the reliability of martial. We know what they're going to be able to churn out.
Well, there's 2 things I want to hit on that. One is you're also assuming that you have access to all of your spells. Now, I guess Divine, they can pray every day. I think Druid falls in the same camp. So yeah, they got some Wizard, same thing, which is why Wizard is so fucking awesome. But when you look at like Bards and Sorcerers, and I think Warlocks as well, they're tied by level. Right. And that's a big deal. So if as a bard, are you picking knock? I don't know. Like a knock is a pretty situational.
Oh, 100%. 100%. So and I'm glad that it is, because it would suck to be a rogue when there's 3 other people on the team who can solve the problem that you were made to solve.
Right.
But that crossing of the line, I think the entirety of my perspective hinges on this thought. Can a caster more readily reach into the frontline position,
Do you
then a fighter can really reach into the control area of effect. And I don't think there's even look, Moon Druid, Forge Cleric, very potent frontline casters.
Yeah. Heck, I've even heard of a tank bard.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy to me.
And that's ultimately, I mean, even an abjuration wizard.
Oh, they're pretty salty.
I mean, so there's a lot of, but show me the tank that is doing massive crowd control and area damage, and the fighter is great at what they're good at.
Right.
But it's and the real beauty of this whole conversation, I think, is I think it serves to illuminate that the much easier fix, obviously, is not to go, here's all the ways we need to nerf casters.
Right.
Well, I'll say this. This depends heavily on your system. But for 5th edition, where it's totally happy, content, wanting to tell high fantasy stories with mind-bending magical powers,
right.
To me, it's a simple deal going like, there's really 4 kind of primary marshals, if you're including Barbarian. I think that's a fair
I would say.
It doesn't seem like that big of an ask to go, even if it was something as simple as scale their damage a little more aggressively. I mean, like that little bit,
I'd be down
all of a sudden goes, like I agree with what you're saying. I love the notion that there's a flavor difference there.
Right.
That you want to play Marshal because you want to be consistent. You've trained. You are a master at this specific skill. But I think the more situations you spool out and go, how does this character solve this? How does this character solve this? And again, all the characters solve all the situations better when they've got a different character at their back. And when
that's the
and
one of my big points. But
100%. I think, but to some extent, let's just say that gap pushed further apart. And there is some indication at this point that I'm hesitant to say anything because they're changing so much from playtest to playtest.
I don't know if you want all hail well in D&D, but I
but it has not escaped some people that a number of what's been pushed out has only furthered that divide.
See, I've been kind of keeping out of the
So, but all that to say is, let's say you did expand that. You expand that gap far enough, like by not addressing this, at some point you're not going to have that fighter on your team. Because who the hell's going to pick the fighter who can't scale with the rest of the party?
Well, as true as that might be, we're not talking about one D&D and where it's going.
No. But that's just, I think that's why this is an important acknowledgement.
Okay.
Because if it's not addressed when it's a small problem, it could be a big problem.
So, okay, I just don't like the idea of like people are like, oh, why would you ever play a martial character why don't you see what the wizards can do? And it's like, no, you all player classes bring something to the table that
Absolutely.
Just because a wizard might be able again, man, how many times has my butt been saved by hypnotic pattern? Just one of like, God,
such a gross spell,
such a good level,
so gross,
so good. Like fireball's good, but have you looked at hypnotic pattern?
Yeah,
but super great spell. But again, it's like, well, I'm the meat shield of the party. I'm the tank. How many times would my party have died if I wasn't really good at my job?
Right. Well, and like I said, I certainly don't want to conflate the topic of this conversation with there are classes that will happily do everything without the support of their team. That, like, to me, that'd be a hallmark of bad game design, especially in a cooperative game environment.
100%. So yeah, if you see one D&D, all hail one D&D. If it's going that direction, that is definitely worrying. There's a lot of things worrying about one D&D. One thing you said like a long time ago, and I meant to address, is you said that wizards have the ability to be so creative with their spells, like minor illusion. You're limited by your imagination, and absolutely is true. But I think the tables, and I'm not very good at this. I'm not a very creative player in a lot of ways, but you can be really creative as a marshal. How many like mundane items exist in D&D? So you have shovels, picks, you have traps. You have a block and pulley. I mean, you can lift tons of weight.
Right.
You can create I guess it takes more time, perhaps, but you can do a lot of really, really creative things as a martial character that doesn't take any like I guess.
But those things aren't exclusive to being a martial character. That wizard could use that pick or that block and tackle and that's what I'm saying is that line, it's very easy to cross that line in one direction, but it's very difficult for the martial classes to cross the line in the direction of casting. And that to me is like, that's really, it's a semi-permeable membrane that seems very easy for casters to reach through and again, fill roles that by all rights, I think should be martial roles.
Well, they could be. It's like if you're I imagine if I was like, I'm going to dig a pit, would that be an athletics check?
I mean, I guess it depends on the amount of time. Like if you're like, you have all day. You have all day. I mean, I'll just go, cool, you dig a pit. I mean, if you need that pit dug, if you need that pit dug in an hour, then maybe there's
pickaxe through a stone wall. I mean, even a block and will make a job much easier, but you still have to have the base foundation of strength to lift it.
No doubt.
So like I see what you're saying, but I think just like maybe an Eldritch Knight could kind of dip its toes into what the magic user does. I think Eldritch Knight will never be a wizard. I don't think a wizard could ever do what a barbarian could do.
Right.
Or a rogue.
Yeah, I think they're unique in that regard. I think if you were to lay out, and we can go pillar by pillar in this regard, but just lay out in any given pillar, each of the classes serves to fill a certain role on the team. They do certain things well, they do other things less well. In the spirit of that flexibility that casters bring to the game, there's not many roles that I think that casting classes can't fill. And there are some very explicit ones that marshals can't.
Yeah.
I mean, like marshals as a rule of thumb are not going to be a controller. You're just not going to control the battlefield.
I can't think of one that would be able to pull that off.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I'd be all for that being an option, but really, this kind of ties back to maybe an older school sentiment. I just like when characters have their lane, or when classes
that makes
have
you appreciate your that character.
Exactly.
More.
Like I want a wizard to need to look to their fighter and go like, can you handle this, bud? Like, and I think that while that's certainly the case, I mean, there will be instances where the wizard's going to do that.
Right.
I think if you're calling for something to be accomplished, and to some extent, it's also a testament to the absolute breadth of balancing that has to occur when you're talking about something like a spell list.
Yeah.
Is just conceiving of, and the beauty is, it's one of the most enjoyable parts of the game is seeing a player use something, spells included, in a way that you're going like, oh, okay, like, cool. But oftentimes that's precisely when a caster is bending a spell into a way that I think it wasn't intentionally written to be used. But you don't want to squash that behavior. That's really good behavior from players at the table. But what I wish is that there were skills that could serve the same on the martial end. Because I think, like you're saying, creative play can come from anywhere at the table. Right. It doesn't matter what class you are. But when you've got sheets of paper that say, here's some vague stuff that this spell does. Be creative with it. That's so unshackled by the mechanics that and I think is doubled down by the fact that DMs, and I think rightfully so, are disinclined to punish their players when they're thinking creatively and using their tools creatively. Right. I think those kind of they serve to couple to just make so many situations where we're diving into kind of the dusty portions of your spell list, and going like, maybe I can try XYZ. And whether that scales directly to power, I do think that, I think especially as you're moving through the tiers, a power discrepancy reveals itself, but it may even be something underlying below power, in that it's not a quantifiable power. It's a power that can be expressed by the nature of the arcane, and I guess it's kind of being expressed this way, being more unshackled from the mechanics of the game. There's just so many spells that, I mean, like I said, there are many spells. Clearly, the spell Fireball is it's pretty cut and dry what it does. But the spell Minor Illusion, much less so.
Right.
The spell, there's a laundry list of spells
why can't I remember what it is? It's so baller. Like your enemy sees an illusion, they believe it so much, and they'll like, so you can like make a drawbridge across a thing. And
send an army over the.
Yeah, I forget what it is, but it's amazing illusion spell. God, the comment section, please save me.
They'll pick up our slack. God. But it's precisely those spells, which, like I said, it's very like. Quantify the potency of Minor Illusion. It's almost impossible to say is it really strong? Is it really weak? It's entirely dependent on the creativity of its application.
Right.
And I don't think even take what, again, I consider the Battle Master to be the biggest lean in the right direction for the martial classes because they've got skills. Now, those skills are still almost exclusively, maybe even exclusively, I'd have to think about that for a second, but tethered thoroughly to the mechanics of the game. None of them are like, you have a skill that allows you to do a funny dance and your enemy, it's just a total deal where your DM has to go like, how do I want to adjudicate this? They're not explicitly told by.
I think there's some there are some non-combat. It might be UA, and if it is, I'm sorry. Silver Tongued, I think, is a battle where you can like.
I think Amanda even considered that one.
Where you get like it helps your charisma or your persuasion. I forget quite what it does.
Right.
But that still is clear cut. This is what it does. Right. It's not creative.
And I think
what you do with it's creative.
Right. Those gaps, with regard to the spell list, are the places where opportunity for unbelievable swings in the game can exist. And like I said, it's kind of this double whammy of going, well, I'm pretty confident that's not what they intended with that spell, but do I really want to stomp on you when you pulled something creative out? In the exact same way, if a martial class did something creative, I'm disinclined to stomp that out. I mean, unless either perspective is egregious, and it's like, that's kind of the backbone of my concern, and my concern is really where it bleeds over.
Well, let me put this to you. Let's say you have creative. You have two players. The wizard is not very creative, versus the marshal who's very creative.
Okay.
Do you think even though the wizard, do you think the marshal could do some cooler things than the wizard, even though the wizard has the natural minor illusion stuff?
Well, I mean, obviously the strength of a spell like Minor Illusion, really the strength of your engagement with the world, regardless of class, hinges upon how creatively or not. But if you're purely talking about, maybe you are banned from taking any spells that don't have hard and fast rule contingencies. I still think you have a monster to contend with. Even to some extent, a lot of this would be circumstantial, but I'd be very curious to see. In fact, I'm going to go seek out and see if anyone has run in some of the virtual tabletops or anything like that, combat tests between level 1 classes, just 1v1. No. Because now, obviously, if you're starting 10 feet away from each other, the wizard has a much bigger problem on their hands. Right. You're starting 100 feet away from each other. I think I might feel for the fighter. It's and to that extent, it's kind of like we touched on. Battlefields are dynamic. Right. There's not going to be, a rogue would really do well to not even be known that they're there until they're making their sneak attack. Right. So that would be playing to their strengths. But I think on all things aside, there's, like I said, even at low levels, and I think I'm in a spot to start talking about how we progress through those tiers, but most of my headspace thus far has been kind of at this low level where I do think all things are pretty equal.
Okay.
But I think the testament to that gap that begins opening up is mid-tier, late tier. I think we start seeing a pretty decisive gap widening. I mean, like I said, we can go to the extreme.
Right.
And I don't know that there's a single level 9 spell that any marshal can even hope to produce the same impact on the game. Whether that's, and I think that could even go across almost all barriers, whether you're talking about damage, whether you're talking about control, whether you're talking about, and this is especially if you're getting if you're talking about a crazy wizard player who's getting kooky with, the old prismatic wall, reverse gravity, that type of nonsense.
I was about to say, you're also limited. Something we haven't hit on yet that's a big limitation is concentration, which really stops you from doing that incredibly wacky stuff.
Right. Well, some of it.
Like, you can only concentrate on one thing at a time, and most of the stuff that lets you bend reality, hypnotic pattern, for example, is concentration.
Yeah. Well, the one that I was nodding to was the prismatic wall, reverse gravity trope of like put the wall above them, reverse gravity, and they fall into the wall and do whatever
I'm gonna be honest with you, I have not heard of that combo.
But it's a perfect example of how creative that thinking can result in unbelievable outcomes.
Yeah.
And
what?
Oh no.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, what if the rogue? I'm going off a Disney trope. The original Mulan, I haven't seen the new Mulan, but the original Mulan, I assume it's in the new one too, where she shoots the cannon and creates an avalanche and wipes out a whole. There was not a spell cast there. She uses her brain to be like, oh, so maybe you cause a rock slide or something as a martial class. You could do something like that. Now that's not predictable. You can't. That's really
right. And again, I think it could be a cannon. It could be a high level spell.
Yeah.
There's nothing exclusive to Marshall about that. And that's what I'm saying. Marshall needs some things that are exclusive to them. They have nothing that the spellcasters are just reaching over and going like, hey there, Marshall. And Marshall goes like, I do a lot of things well, but there's a whole slice of the space that marshals really have a hard time reaching into. And I think,
well, that's control, which I totally will admit. And like, if you're like, hey, who could have the biggest drastic difference on a battlefield instantly, I think it's hard to argue against a spellcaster. But like in our own game, if we weren't having a rogue dealing out good consistent damage, we would have I don't know, we would have used all of the wizard spell slots in one freaking battle.
Right.
Like,
right.
Yeah, so I mean, it's who saved who won that battle then?
Well, I don't think it's a matter. I mean, because it's a team. I mean, it's cooperative. I don't think it's a matter of who contributed the most.
Well, I think there are tables that definitely jive off.
I think that ultimately, I mean, that's a player by player, table by table thing. But I mean, like I said, the extreme example being, all hell is breaking loose, and you have the option between anything that your rogue or fighter or barbarian can do,
right?
Or your wizard has a wish spell at their disposal. Which do you draft onto your team?
Yeah, wish spell. And I was like, well, it's because I was like, oh, if it's a bottleneck, yeah, give me my tank. But then I was like, well, a wizard could cast Wall of Force and block it.
And it's also, well, again, furthermore, precisely the things that we were talking about hamstringing the casters.
Yeah.
Becomes so much less an issue as you move through those tiers. I mean, the number of spell slots you have at your disposal. Yeah. And while I get it feels really bad to be a wizard who is going to spend the rest of the day hitting something with a stick because you don't have any spell slots, kind of in the pre-cantrip days, it was at least an opportunity for you to acknowledge why you can do the incredible things you can when you can.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of what has transpired for the wizard, obviously in 5th edition, all character classes have a lot more hit points than they used to. But for instance, the transition from wizards having D4 hit dice to D6 hit dice.
Yes.
The ease with which wizards can garner shield and armor proficiencies.
Well, that's multi-class. I guess you could take a feat.
You could take a feat.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
Was that not a thing in old school? Could you not?
Well, there's some casting that can't be done at all if you're wearing armor.
Gotcha.
So, but the point is where is that ease for the fighter to reach in and grab that spell? I mean, they're like, the fighter is the guy with the shield. He's the guy with the big armor.
Right.
And if I go like, well, I got a caster, but I also want to like that barrier to me should be less permeable to go, yeah, I want a shield. Yeah, I want that heavy armor. Yeah, I want to still do all of my casting.
Yeah.
And that I think in some regard, the barriers to the things, I like my wizards easy to hit and squishy.
Yeah.
Because I also like them explosive and devastating.
Yeah, glass cannon.
Yeah. And not just like that's the way I want them built. That's the way I want a system to enforce them.
Right.
Because that's the drawback to playing a wizard.
Yeah.
If you I think that's not to say it's the most optimized thing to do, but if you wanted to feel like you're one of the big boys at the table, and still have all of the potency of casting those spells, a select few feats put you not that far off from having a reasonable AC,
right.
having a not insubstantial hit point pool.
I was just thinking that cleric would become even more ridiculous when you think about it, because they already have access to heavy armor. They're already spellcasters.
Yeah,
I mean, that would make them over the top.
I think it's one of those deals where I guess my biggest advocacy and to some extent I guess this goes out to the one D&D ethos is I would die on the hill that this chasm, however big or small it is, needs to be looked at by the design team as something, like I said, clearly right now. I mean, I know many tables that have both martial, caster, half caster, It's not something that is immediately writing off a subset of the classes. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be. And again, the game's richer for the
Yeah, if you want to be a wizard, you can only you're limited to, or if you want to do a concentration spell, you have to be in light or no armor, or you take disadvantage.
Right.
There's
There's a bunch of things that wouldn't be. And the thing is they're changes they made deliberately. These aren't, this isn't the way it's always been. And like Marshall's been falling off. I just think they've given a few nods to the way spellcasting works that have allowed spellcasters an easier time than, and I see why. Again, the cantrip thing is a good example. It's way more fun to sling a firebolt when you don't want to, burn a third level spell slot.
Like a magic user,
right?
And that can't, like, when you play video games, if you play the wizard, when you do your basic attack, you're doing some magic thing,
right? I think to some extent the lens through which I view the system as right. Mm-hmm. was the one where when I burned my 3 spell slots, I was loading rocks into my sling, or I was getting and like I said, that's not fun. I'm not saying that that's a more fun way of being.
When you think of wizard, that's what you think of.
Well, and when I think of wizards, I think there has to be some cost for wielding so much power, and if that cost isn't in, you will be objectively worse at melee and ranged combat than those who are that's their bag. But I don't really see a wizard who has tapped themselves out feeling like their firebolt that they're slinging is all that much of a downgrade from the ranger, who literally ranged combat is their thing, and he's not tapped out. He's just doing his thing.
Yeah.
And he's going like, hey, I'm over here maxing it out.
But he's got Hunter's Mark.
Well, that's
anyway.
but it's just so it's one of those deals where I think in the spirit of trying to keep the class enjoyable at all times, they've they've removed some of the things that hamstrung the casting classes, and I think it's to the detriment of the marshals, not to the casters.
Okay, so what I thought we disagreed, I think we just need more clarification, because I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Can I deny that Wish spell can pretty much trump anything a martial character could ever do? I can't deny that. Or mini hypnotic pattern, which I think you get is a 3rd level spell, so 5th level wizard can dramatic.
For some reason I thought it was even before that, but
no, I think you get it the same time as Fireball. I think. Sorry if I get it wrong.
Very, very potent spell.
Very potent, and from it can do so much. But I just don't like. Marshall brings so much to the table that you don't overlook that martial player. And as a martial player, don't be like, well, I don't really need to be creative, or I don't, because I got the wizard. Don't do that to your character. Continue to try to push the boundaries of what Marshall can do, because they can do a lot more than we give them credit for.
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's more incumbent upon martial players to think about the world creatively, because there's nothing in their kit baked in that says be creative with this.
Yes.
It's literally anything you look at. That guy who's boiling stew in the back of the tavern as the brawl breaks out. Well, you want to throw a scalding pot of water on someone?
There you go.
Great. That's a very unwizard thing to do. It's not to say that they couldn't, but it's just one of those deals where the wizard has all sorts of very loose boxes, i.e. these kind of creative spells that kind of goad them to go, how creative can you get with this, bud? Mm-hmm. And the marshals aren't handed that same prompt, I think. So to some extent, I mean, I completely agree that it's no excuse to not maximize the ways in which you can interact with the world creatively. And like I said, the biggest takeaway I think is it's not conflate what I would say is an acknowledgement. It really, I think, is an acknowledgement of a problem in the design of the system.
And I can see where you're coming from that standpoint.
But to not conflate it with the fact that you shouldn't, that these classes shouldn't be at your tables, and they don't bring their own utility and their own.
You need that damage, consistent damage, or you're going to run into some problems.
If you recall, for my class, I had Barbarian, I had Fighter, and I had Rogue on my.
Oh, there you go.
I love the martial classes. I think part of the reason to address this and to hopefully see it addressed in 1D&D.
All hail 1D&D.
is because I think the narrower that gap is, or if there was some mechanic that closed it entirely, the more inclined we are to see a menagerie of class archetypes instead of, I mean, like at our table, it's and this is not to say that we have not had a monk, but it's a class that I think on occasion Ranger has gotten a lot of getting overlooked.
Yep.
And so it's no secret that once an issue, let's call it an issue of power discrepancy has been identified, that can take its toll on the viability of that. And I still know a bunch of people who play Ranger even through all of the shit that was being talked. And they're great characters. I mean,
we talk shit, but do you?
Yeah, and so it's kind of, I think that chasm is first and foremost best served just from the tidiness by just look at those 4 classes and figure out a way to not make them more like casters, make them better at what it is that they do that's unique.
Yeah, I like that. And I agree with Battlemaster has some really unique things. That's a limited resource too, so you have to be creative and
and you're making decisions.
Right.
Is awesome.
Yeah.
I actually think it's a great template for all of the marshals, in which each martial class might have access to a different list of maneuvers. There could even be an entirely different their own system.
Yeah.
But it's a really solid template to kind of point in the direction. And I think there's a lot of people who have acknowledged just both the potency and the enjoyment of Battlemaster as a design.
Yeah, I think
it's a really successful way of expressing martial prowess, without at all. I don't think it feels at all like he's a caster. And
No.
that, to me, that would be the biggest cardinal sin, is if
Yes.
someone heard this conversation and went, let's fix that. And now all of a sudden, all these marshals feel more like casters.
No, you're right. Make
To
it its
me,
own thing.
Yeah, I'd rather that it be exactly as it is than that.
Yes.
Because I am a big proponent of some amount of the classes staying
So
truly martial.
What's your on the trickster, on the arcane trickster? What's your opinion?
Don't start with Arcane Trickster. Rogue's my boy, and he doesn't need to do anything with magic.
Yeah,
He's perfect the way he is.
Oh, arcane trickster's dope.
And the thing is, it's potent, and that's what bothers me even more.
But yeah, I think. What do you think? We're good to wrap it up here.
Yeah, I think we can. I would love to hear people's thoughts down below. Like I said, I'd love to continue to hear arguments to the contrary. In thinking about this topic, and we're certainly not the first ones to touch on it. It is a pretty open conversation on this topic. But I would love for someone to like I said, whittle away at my resolve and my position even more. I guess I will be waiting with bated breath to see
what they do.
What they do.
One day.
We'll just see when that time comes. So,
okay.
Any final thoughts?
No, sir. I think we're good to wrap her up.
All right. That's ye old Marshall and Arcane. How do we want to take this one out?
Let's just do old wizard.
Is that me?
Yeah, you're the old wizard because
Okay.
you gave it to me, so I get to tell you what to do.
Oh,
And you're better
okay.
at voices than me anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Old wizard talking to the young whippersnapper fighter about how valuable magic is.
This is gonna get lengthy, so let me start by stopping time.
Now he can't leave in case he intended to. So
Wasted a level 9 spell slot to pull off
in
this
the
one.
stasis, you didn't say how old. I'm ancient, boy.
He's a lich. You didn't know this.
I've got level 12 spells in my pocket. I don't bust them out for this type of.
Now,
occasion,
hold on,
but
Tom.
Hold on there.
You don't have
Hold on.
access to level 12 spells.
Listen here, because a little chap like yourself,
And I think just for flash and show, I have to have I'll burn up to a level 6 spell slot just to have some filigree kind of spiraling around me.
Oh my god. Are you sure you're not a bard?
I may, in my younger years, I dipped a level or two, but the thing you need to understand as such a weak representation of the races, my martial boy, poor young man, is someday you might multi-class into a casting class, at which point the world will be yours.